Yeah. I'm actually probably going to have to wrap this up early because I have to get down to the floor for my Herbert Jefferson photo op. So I hope you guys are good for it. It's going to be cutting this about 15 minutes. Everybody having a good time?
Yeah.
Good. It's 110 at my house, at the brand new house that I just spent a shit ton of money on, but I don't have central air. So I'm doing backflips here because it's air conditioned and it's wonderful. I've already talked to the people who run the convention center about setting a tent up somewhere. Probably have my wife come and meet me and we'll set up shop here. So it's an interesting con. I'm loving it. Did anyone else get offered tequila by a Doc Brown in the bathroom? No? It's crazy stuff. A lot of business. So the motor mouth sitting here at the podium is Rylend Grant. I like to talk about myself in the third person. I have been a working screenwriter in Hollywood for about 12 years. I've been paid very handsomely to write movies that never get made. Yeah, and so as it says in the panel description, my first comic book, Aberrant, born of my frustration in the film business, is being published by Action Lab Comics this winter. So I thought that whole story and the story of these people who are much smarter than me and better accomplished than me in the comics business would make for a good panel. Yeah, and so I'm here to present these stories. We have good news, really. 5 years ago, even, making your own comic book was impossible. I tried to do it in college. It was very difficult to find an artist. It was very difficult to find this and that and bring all the elements together. So difficult that I just kind of abandoned ship. Really, in the last 5 years, it's just gotten a whole lot easier. It's gotten a whole lot more possible. Easy is not a good word because let the first lesson of this panel be that it's just not going to be easy. This is, putting my first comic together was the hardest thing I've probably ever had to do. Delivering, the first 5-issue trade to Action Lab was, teeth-kicking, gut-punching. I cried a couple of times. I screamed several times. There was a drunken night or two where I wished that I was dead. I'm being dramatic now. But so you're going to go through some trials and tribulations. It's going to be difficult, but like anything that's worth doing, roll with it. It's ultimately going to be worth it. So that is my story. Let me present my panelists. To my left here, we have David Pepose, who he started out, he was an intern at DC, and then for years he was a writer and an editor at Newsarama, focusing a lot on actually comic critique, which makes for an interesting transition. David's first comic, Spencer and Locke, was published last year by Action Lab Entertainment. And it sort of quickly became a critical darling. People are kind of doing backflips over it. It's really good. If you haven't read it, go down to the floor and get a couple of copies and hunt Dave down on the floor and have him sign for you. So the very pregnant person next to David Pepose, if I can make her uncomfortable, like I'm so good at, is my good friend Karla Nappi. Karla is a TV writer and script coordinator with credits on Suits and Bates Motel and The Good Wife. Her first comic, Duplicant, is soon to be released. Can I say the publisher, or would you rather not? By Vault Comics, which is a really interesting sort of upstart, sort of taking comics and movies by storm. Those are the people who went the traditional publishing route. I'm trying to give you kind of an eclectic bunch here, people who have had different experiences. Next is the crew who self-published. In various ways. Lisa K. Weber was, for years, a very prolific illustrator of young and middle grade readers' books. She did character designs and storyboards for companies like Nickelodeon and PBS Kids. And a few years back, she sort of veered into the comic lane, and she and her business partners, they started their own company, which is a sort of titanic undertaking in this world. called Hex Comics, which serves as a platform now to publish their title, Hex 11. Stephen Prince is our other self-publisher and our other artist on the panel. Also, Steve has managed and developed toy lines and animation projects for Puppy in My Pocket, which I don't know about you guys, but I think it's, it's one of my personal favorite things. State Blasters and Power Bugs. Steven's been around the block with that stuff. He has been self-publishing for years. He is the writer and artist of the acclaimed indie comics Monster Matador, The Third, and the webcomic Unemployment. And then there are the anthology guys. It's actually it's occurring to me that I forgot to do the art. I had that nice lady. That's my book. And then that is David's book. That is Karla's book. I'm a jerk, guys. I've already messed this up. I'm already going down in flames. Stay with me, guys. That is Lisa's book. These are Stephen's books. And then we go on to, as I said, the anthology guys, one of which is walking in the door right now. All right, let's give him a round of applause.
Big entrance, right? Hi.
Thanks for showing up. First we have Jeff Leeds. Jeff is kind of the adult on the panel in a lot of ways. Jeff is a rather storied journalist who has written for the New York Times and the LA Times. Is that correct? And I want to make sure I get this right. He is currently the senior director of digital platforms for NBC. Is that correct? I feel like you're the rest of us are just kind of floating through life, taking a job here, a job there. I feel like you're the one with you probably have assistants and.
We're all in trouble if that's the case.
Is that the case? Is NBC hiring?
Yes, but not for anything.
Not you.
I'm very good here. Yeah.
You're a big deal there, right? Damn it. Okay, so Jeff went a different route, and rather than doing some big, huge project, Jeff has published stories in the Not Forgotten anthology, which you're taking a long look at there, and the Vegas themed strip anthology, not stripped. And yeah, those are available wherever fine comics are sold. And then finally, our late comer, Mike Levine. Mike is the author of a number of books, including the Dr. Seuss themed "Oh, the Flesh You Will Eat," which is kind of a comic in its own.
It's certainly graphic and novel, so I feel qualified to be here today.
All the Feelings, Melodramatic Monologues for the Thespians of a Teenage, Be a Devastator, and At Least You're Not These Monsters, most recently, with Daniel Lacey. He has written for The Onion, he has written for Devastator, and his first comic story was published in another anthology called Strange Romance, which is out there. So I will go back to this fancy thing with our Twitter handles and all that stuff so you know where to locate us. So let me get started. You've heard me talk long enough. Let's listen to some smart people talk for a minute. And then I'll sort of usurp you guys and talk for hours again. I want to focus on, you guys are all very successful in your own rights in other kind of arenas. You could have sort of, could have stayed at your job at Newsarama forever if you were late. But at some point there was a moment or a situation or something where you said, you know what, I want to make comics. And not just I want to make comics because I think we all would like to make comics, but there was a moment where you just said, you know what, this is actually possible, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to dive into this deep end of this crazy business. And so, short and sweet, let us know what that looked like, because I think that there are probably a lot of people in this panel who are sort of at that crossroads in their life right now.
Well, for me, it was desperation, just pure and simple. I actually had a day job, so I don't want anybody to think, oh man, it's a full-time comic book reviewer. I worked at CBS for about 5 years out in New York City. So Jeff, I mean, that's probably the reason why they put us across the side from one another.
We didn't want anything.
But no, it was one of those things. I think I had tried every stable job I could possibly think of, and I wasn't happy at it. I wasn't happy doing any of it. And on the other side of things, I was reading comics. I was reading comics all the time. And I think these things come in waves, and sometimes you're reading stuff and everything's on fire and you're loving it. And then there's going to be periods where it's not resonating with you, it's not clicking with you, and that's kind of what happened with me. And finally, I kind of got to the point where I wasn't liking almost anything I was reading, and something in the back of my head said, why don't you put your money where your mouth is then? And the thing is, I mean, I don't know about everybody else here, they might be a little bit more confident than me. I really didn't set out to be like, yeah, I'm gonna write a comic. I was just like, I'm gonna write a script and just see if I like it. And then I was like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna like try to find an artist to see if I like that too. And then I was like, I'll just try pitching, like what's the worst that could happen? And then I was like, oh no, somebody wants us to finish this comic, okay. So I mean, it wasn't really, I kind of did it on accident. But, you know, in doing it, the process of doing it, I realized, like, this is the most fun I've had working in a really long time. It didn't feel like work. I'd stay up till 2 in the morning, you know, editing color files, or looking over layouts, or, you know, giving notes on thumbnails. And, you know, my father went into business for himself, and that was something he told me shortly before I started writing this. I said, I don't know what I want to do with my life. And he goes, why don't you just take a bet on yourself? And it's the best advice he could have given me. And so now I'm like, oh, okay, well, people seem to like the book, so I guess I'm going to do this for a while.
That's good. Who else has a good story? I should say we're stacked on panels, so you know, you have something to offer, great. If not, no worries.
I got laid off. So I needed something to do. I mean, I've been doing comics forever, like little strips and whatnot, but I'm primarily a writer, and I literally just kind of jumped into it more intensively just because I needed something to do, and I figured, well, I draw it. And I started making, you know, doing a lot of pages. I started with Unemployment, which is a webcomic, and after I did about 100 of them, you know, like what Rylend was saying about opportunities, now things like Comixology and whatnot, you can go through Comixology, submit, and have your book published, and you know, have it out there for everyone. You're no longer trying to go from store to store with handmade copies or whatnot. So for me, it's just the past few years I've just been doing it and doing it and doing it, and it's kind of good.
For me, it was I guess the moment was when the team came into play, because that's super impressive that you were able to do it all yourself. I certainly couldn't. I had been a freelance illustrator for a while, but you know, as with all things that you don't really get full credit for, things that aren't really your idea or your passion. Just because I'm making art and making money making art doesn't mean that it's totally soul satisfying. So I had this story in my head, and I didn't really know what form it was going to take until I actually started getting comic work, doing things like in graphic classics and stuff, where an editor took a chance on me to do a comic that I'd never done comics before. And boy, that was a learning experience. And then I finally, I did it enough that I got to know how to do it. But then I just didn't have the know-how of how to sell it, of how to kind of organize my time around it, or how to write it. And my very good friend, Lindley Forrest, our editor and our producer, moved to LA. We had been friends in New York for many years. And she was like, well, what do you want to do with your life? And I was like, I want to make this comic. And she was like, all right, let's do it. And she has got a can-do attitude. And and then we brought Kelly Sue in to write the book, and it wouldn't exist without the team. That was the thing that happened that made the comic happen, was the team.
Yeah, I was doing stand-up for a while, and I used to listen to podcasts and hear stand-up comics go like, oh, there was like this one day that I went on stage and I felt like totally at home, and this was what I was supposed to do, and I never got that feeling on stage. But then I wrote this anthology piece for The Devastator, and I described this one page that was a parody of Oh, the Places You'll Go, with like a branching sort of like heart and like valves, and yeah, I don't know if I have it for you, but I just wrote it down, and it came back to me in an image from the artist exactly how I described it. And I was like, oh, this is a great scheme where I could just come up with stuff and then it comes back real. And that's, I felt totally at home there. I was like, this is for me.
Just quickly, I think my story is sort of similar to David's in that I had, I have a day job, but I had always been a comic fan. My very first job when I was a teenager was in a comic shop, so lifelong fan. And after kind of leaving journalism and realizing that I didn't really have an outlet as much for writing or creative work in general, I thought I had the idea to maybe do comics in my head for a while. But the transformational moment, I have to say, for me was actually going to my very first comic convention and seeing, walking through Artist Alley and walking around and seeing not just the people that I knew as a comics fan were star artists and people that had drawn big lines of people, but actually seeing some work that was, I don't want to be mean, but some work that seemed achievable. And so I think it was seeing that actual real life human beings who were just putting themselves out there, and basically, whether they were incredible or not, had just done it. And I remember specifically having a moment where I was at some table looking at someone's self-published comic that I didn't think was that great, but realizing that literally the only difference between me and that person sitting there was that they had the willpower to see it through. And so it's sort of hard to overstate that literally the only real obstacle is just finding that willpower to see it through. So I did.
Cool. Yeah, I think my moment, it was two-pronged. It was very much like Jeff's, where I don't know if it was a specific moment, but we entered an age where this became, like I said, very possible for the first time. I tried it back in college. I failed miserably. It was too hard to find the artist that was capable and the people who would deliver and the people that would invest in it. But we're in the age of Facebook groups and convention mixers and stuff like that. And it just became very easy to meet the people that you needed to meet. Kind of like Lisa was talking about, to get your book across the finish line. That's what I will say is, unless you're kind of a dynamo like Steven, you can't do everything yourself. It's very rare. I rely on about 10 people to get my books across the finish line, and without any one of them, I would be completely lost. So that was part of it. Just I finally was able to find the people, but then also just as a screenwriter, the town got really crazy recently. We transitioned to this period of IP where everything has to be based on something else. So I've been selling scripts and pitches for, 8 years, and then suddenly you couldn't do that anymore. Everything had to be based on something. And so the last 3 movies that I sold, I took an idea that I had for a movie, and I knew I couldn't sell it as a script or a pitch. I wrote it as a short story first. I got the short story published, and then I had a bidding war over the short story in Hollywood. And then I got paid twice. I got paid for the short story, and I got paid to write the script. So it occurred to me, well, I could probably do the same thing with comic books. And, you had to find the right idea, something that was more suited for a comic than a short story. But and so, you have something to add?
Yeah, I would say that's kind of what got me into comics as well,
Because you're a film business.
breaking into TV as a writer is incredibly hard. And I wrote Duplicate as a pilot script initially to try to help me get staffed. And then the IP thing was coming up more and more and more. So I'd been going to conventions because of work. Bates Motel was the first job that took me to a convention in San Diego, and I fell in love with going to conventions after that. And I decided to look into how to do comic book writing because I had no concept of how it actually happened. And so Rylend and Mike and I all took a class together at Meltdown Comics with Jim Higgins on how to write comic books. And then we took a second class together, and that's how I know Steve and Jeff. And I just fell in love with the medium. It's an incredibly challenging way to write. And I realized I could turn duplicates, instead of it just being a one-off issue, I could turn it into an entire series.
And it's if you guys don't know Meltdown Comics in LA, you should become very familiar with it. It's a wonderful place. We all met kind of hanging out there. And if you have any questions or worries about the comic book process and what it takes and how to learn scripting and how to learn to work with an artist and everything, we'll give you a nice overview here. You can track us down outside and ask us specific questions. But they have some really great classes out there that'll take you through everything. There's another fellow who we're fond of named Jim Higgins, who you can find online, who also does great classes on his own. So there are a lot of resources now. I know David really benefited from classes also.
Yeah, I was going to say, for people who aren't in the LA area or might be outside of that, Andy Schmidt, who is the editor of Guardians of the Galaxy, the DNA, the Advent and Landing run, he does a series of online courses at a program called Comics Experience, and I highly recommend it. They take classes on writing, they take classes on art, on inking, on coloring, on lettering, on production, on editing, on writing for licensed properties, advanced storytelling, and I took several classes with those. They're all online, so you can take them wherever you live. And I can tell you, for example, Spencer and Locke, if you pick it up, which you can find me at Artist Alley, I believe I'm in E6, the book's colors look amazing. And I think I tested a lot of that is because I took a class on coloring, so I could work with my colorist, and I knew the vocabulary to work with. But I'm going to tell you one other thing, because I don't want people who say, oh, I can't afford this class to freak out, because there's a way to do this that I promise you is very cheap. Scott Snyder recommended this advice to me a while back, and I think it's really smart. He uses Batman Year One, but you can use any big comic that you really enjoy. Dark Knight Returns, Watchmen, Kingdom Come, anything. Reverse engineer it. Literally just take page one and say, okay, I'm going to write a script based on literally page one, panel one, here's the description, dialogue, panel two, dialogue, description. And you just do that for the whole book. And if you do that, you're going to sort of get a sense of how much can I fit on a page? How much dialogue is too much dialogue? How do I describe this in a certain kind of economy? And it'll really help you out in terms of pacing and sort of the little rules that you kind of figure out. Like, I'll give you one for free. Unless you're doing a 9-panel grid or a 16-panel grid, you probably don't want to do more than 5 or 6 panels a page. That's if every great once in a while you might be able to squeeze in an extra panel or two, but you have to pace that in your head. How will this fit on a page? And so if you take your favorite comics and you kind of reverse engineer it like that, it's really invaluable and it's dirt cheap.
It's really good advice. One more note on classes, because I've been writing forever. Nobody had to tell me how to format a comic script. I could get on Jim Zub's website, which I highly recommend if you haven't been there, and download a template that just tells me, hey, this is how you should format your script. And so I didn't have to go and learn how to write a comic book. But the classes at Meltdown gave me a community. We got together once a week, and once a week I had a deadline. I had to get my script pages done. I had to get them in. And then when I turned them in, they got torn apart and built back up by really smart people on this panel. That was invaluable. I sort of learned what these pages have to stand up to, and what is a really competitive industry environment. I thought that was very important. And then you need community. You need people to bounce ideas off of. I got a 10-issue order for Aberrant, which is kind of Herculean. It was sort of idiotic for me to try to tackle 10 issues in my first book, I think. But Jeff and Karla, they get every script. and they take me to task still on every script, and that's very valuable, and you need those people in your life. So I don't want to get too far away from our outline here. This is all great stuff, but I want to go back to something that Lisa said about her moment, because what triggered it for you was the idea, and I think a lot of us sort of had similar sentiment. I certainly did. For me, it was about finding something that was a comic story and not a short story or a screenplay or something like that. I think that's very important. So, I'm sure there are plenty of people in this audience that think they're sitting on, the greatest comic idea since, Why the Last Man, and that may very well be the case, but we should maybe examine that a little bit, because here's the thing, you can't commit to an idea willy-nilly, right? I mean, you're talking, you guys can attest to this. If you're going to commit to a comic idea and actually getting this book made, you're going to be spending hundreds of hours, like years of your life on this thing. You may be paying thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars to a very well-deserving artist, of course. And that is...
Say nothing of the printer,
yeah.
having to go to show your letter, your colorist, you have to go to shows, you have to promote your book.
This is, you're buying a dog, okay? so spend some time with him, make sure he's not going to bite anybody, make sure he's not going to shit on the floor, all of those things. And so I want to explore the process with you guys of finding the right idea. And so I have a couple of questions that I'll just toss out, and you can choose to ignore them or answer them. How do you discern the right idea from the wrong idea, the idea that's worth kind of investing all this in? What are publishers looking for these days? Does that even matter? What are readers looking for right now, more importantly, which I think is a very important question. And certainly, if you're looking to go the traditional publishing route and actually have an editor accept your book, or if you're self-publishing and you spend a bunch of money on a table, like Lisa's talking about, and you want that person walking by to stop and say, "Oh wow, this looks interesting. Let me fork over my $10 or whatever." What are the missteps? What can leave you dead in the water from the very beginning? What are the pitfalls we have to avoid? So let me just throw that out to the panel, and anybody who wants to jump in, go ahead.
I want to say real quick, as the artist, you really need to have good art. It's the thing that draws people to your table. It's the thing that draws people to your book. It's what makes them stop and pick it up at all. It has to be good art. You can have the greatest story idea in the world, but if you're, just like, hey, my friend said you would do this for free, you're not going to get to pick it up. It's at least 50% art is a comic book, and that's the very first thing that got to get right.
To piggyback off what you said a little bit, because I might reframe the question a little bit, because I think at least this was going through my head when I was working in Spencer & Locke. By the way, have any of you guys read Spencer & Locke? You can raise your hands if you haven't heard of it. It's What If Calvin Hobbes Grew Up in Sin City? That's our logline.
Shameless plug.
The thing that I thought when I was doing this is you only have one chance to make a good first impression. And so for me, the thing about publishing your first comic, just to sort of give you guys like kind of a set goal here, is oftentimes it's a loss leader. Oftentimes it's your calling card. It is what you show people to get more work. And so you want to be able to show, like you were saying, that it's at a professional level, to show that you can do it, because that's the difference between you and every other person with an idea, is that you can have it finished. So for me, I thought a lot about what's the kind of book that I wanted to have as my calling card, which I guess, ruining people's childhood newspaper strips is what I was doing. And so, but it's kind of like, instead of buying a dog, for me, I see it as you're running a marathon with a backpack on. What are you going to pack in your backpack? What would you feel is worth running a marathon with that in your back? And for me, it was, about a hard-boiled cop who his childhood was so traumatic and horrific that he is essentially imagined his best friend through adulthood. And sort of that story about a trauma and mental illness and sort of redeeming yourself, sort of overcoming those scars, that was something that kind of carried me to the finish line. And ultimately,
I want to interrupt you right here.
Yeah.
Because I want to point out something very important, and it was the point that I was going to make, is that we have a man here with what is a very, successful book here. He's talking exclusively about character. He's not saying, this happens, plot. The editors aren't going to care about your plot. Hollywood executives aren't going to care about your plot. What is the character arc? We have this character that we either recognize or we can invest in, and he goes through this, and this, and he changes in this way. And that makes a meaningful story, and I think that's the point you're making.
yeah. So I think ultimately, instead of thinking of this as what's the zeitgeist here, what is going to be my big multi-million-dollar hit, Robert Kirkman didn't start with The Walking Dead. And I think it's a lot of pressure to put on yourself to say, oh man, my first comic is going to be my multi-million-dollar empire. No, just think of this as what's the story that's going to be the most me, and it's going to make the best first impression for me for the rest of my career. That's really the goal that I want to impart upon all you guys who want to make your first comics, because it's a long road. It is a marathon, and it's not going to end with your first book. So just make it a book that you love.
Anybody else?
Here.
Okay.
We kind of started to, Hex Comics has started to kind of expand a little bit as far as the titles that we put out. Right now we only have the one, but we would like to change that. And so we kind of want to provide a platform for other people with stories to tell and hook them up with.
Meaning Hex Comics,
Hex Comics,
your
yes.
publishing powerhouse.
Yes, a publishing
Yes.
burgeoning powerhouse, such as it is. So we have people who have approached us and, wanted us to take on their scripts. And a pitfall that we have seen is that people want to start with an ongoing series, and they've never written anything before. And it's let's calm down a little bit.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Yeah, David and I had this very long conversation a couple of days ago about this stuff, and David went on a really great rant about just allaying risk. He just kept saying that. If you go to a publisher, like Hex Comics or any other publisher, and you're like, oh, I got the greatest story, and it's going to be 100 issues, and it's going to, they're going to laugh at you. Yeah. Give them one story arc. Make it interesting enough that you say, well, if sales are good, if sales merit it, then I have 3 or 4 other arcs. But give them one good self-contained arc. And that's for a number of reasons. Because you know what, you other opportunities arise. You may not want to do 100 issues of your first book. Again, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
And attrition is real, by the way. Also that's the other thing. Tell you it certainly didn't happen for Spencer and Locke, and we got a movie option in the middle of it. Attrition is real, and I've talked to plenty of creators who've done long runs who have all said, if I could do it over again, I wouldn't do 60 issues. I'd do 16. Because after a while, it costs money and time and effort to put out a comic, and if you're selling, this math is not accurate, but say you're doing a 16-issue run, and you are now selling 1/16 of what you originally sold for your first issue. Is it worth it to do more, or is it worth it to sort of start with another project? 16 is a great number. 12 is a great number. So, attrition's real. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
4 is a really great number for your first comic.
That's what we're doing.
So let me power through a few bullet points here, just before we kind of move on to this next stanza. We're getting great stuff here. Again, something that sort of was born of the conversation that David and I had is the idea of being able to very succinctly sum up your story in a single sentence. What was the log line again?
Yeah, what if Calvin and Hobbes grew up in Sin City? That sold our book.
People get it immediately. You know what I'm saying? You don't need a 5-minute pitch. You don't need to sit there and no. People understand it immediately. So what is your elevator pitch? What is your log line? It needs to be something that you haven't seen before. That sounds fucking crazy, and I want to read it. If you're like, oh well, it's exactly like this, then then toss it out. You don't have the right idea. Chasing trends can be very problematic. This happens a lot in Hollywood. I sit down with my agents over at Verve, and they're like, time travel is really big right now. Go on, get us some time travel ideas. It takes a long time to do these things. It takes a really long time to get something, drawn up and colored and in print. And by the time you have your time travel story ready, there are going to be 45 other time travel stories out there. And so again, don't get caught up in any of that stuff. I think that's bad news. So we could literally talk about this, I think, for the entire panel. I want to move on a little bit. And I apologize if I'm kind of rushing you guys, but so I want to talk about submissions. So we've decided that we're going to dive headfirst into the deep end of this crazy world. We have established that we have the greatest ideas since sliced bread, and so now we want to present this to a company. In some ways, and it's not that simple. You don't just call up Image and say, hey, here's my log line. What do you think? What do we need to prepare? And what shape does our pitch, our art, have to be in if we're going to go and talk to the Matt Hawkins of the world about the great idea that we have? How many pages do we need? How much art do we need? And I'm sure you guys have all kind of taken different roads on this. What do you guys think?
I found that having the first issue complete was the best way to go. I tried to do the 5-page route and I wasn't getting as much attention, and I did 10 pages. People want to see the whole story. They want to make sure you can tell a complete story in the first issue. And on top of that, I needed a proposal to show that I had envisioned the series past just the first issue, where I broke down what was going to happen in the next few issues, and then broke down where I envisioned it going past that if I was lucky enough to find someone who was willing to fund it past the first story arc.
What does that proposal look like? Page-wise? How much
It was
pages?
5, I want to say it was 5 pages at the end of it. But that was one of the things I workshopped in the classes I took with these guys, was my proposal. And it was about, I want to say it was like 2 paragraphs I wrote. Well, the first page was an overview of the series as a whole, and then each issue was about 2 paragraphs, and then there was another about 2 paragraphs that kind of envisioned what the future of the rest of the series would look like if it went that far.
I'm like the living embodiment of imposter syndrome. So I was much more hesitant. I did 6 pages in the cover, and I did a treatment for the rest of it. And that was only in part because I said, well, people might just not like Ernie Calvin Hobbes, and or they might say something's not right with the art, something's not right with the colors. They might just say this is a really bad idea and you should just shelve it. And also just for me, realistically, it was more affordable for me to do 6 pages in a cover, and then I did a 1-page document. I don't know how I fit it on 1 page, but I did a paragraph sort of saying this is the concept, and then I did 1 paragraph per issue. And I had a title per issue. So first issue is You Can't Go Home Again. The second is Every Rose Has Its Thorns. The third is The Last Flight of Rocket Man Reynolds. And so I'd have a paragraph saying this is what happens in this issue. And you really got to condense. Talking about who are, what other books would fans of your book be reading? So I said Ed Brubaker, I said Warren Ellis, I said obviously Frank Miller and Bill Watterson. For me it was just more of oh man, if I go too deep into this, then I might have just spent a lot of time and money for something that they don't want. But at the same time, I also see the wisdom of going for a full 20 or 22, because then they're like, oh, it's already done, you might as well print it.
Yeah, my rule on this stuff is less is more and more is best. More is best in terms of the more you can give them in terms of your book being finished, the better. I think whenever you get, as Karla said, when you have a completed first issue, you can say this is the book, you're in a very strong position. They can see very clearly whether this is worthwhile or not, what they can expect from you to deliver. Otherwise, they're placing a bet on an unknown. If you're Garth Ennis, you can say, hey, this is my pitch. Here's a couple of sentences. When you're not, you have to prove that you can do this. And then in terms of your pitch, I think that's where the less is more comes in. I think 1 page One page is always the way I go. One very succinct page that lets people know this is what the book is, these are the themes I'm wrestling with, these are my influences, and you give them that. You're going to go to these editors and they're swamped. They have 20 books, that are actually getting printed every month that they have some sort of responsibility on. They have 15 minutes at the end of a Friday before they go and have beers with their friends to open up their email and look at the 1,000 messages they've gotten from people submitting random books, and they don't want to sift through your 20-page outline. It's just not going to happen. They'll open it up and they see it and they're going to toss it in the garbage. So one page, it doesn't take long for them to read, and if they want more, have it ready. Write the larger outline, write a 5-page outline, write a 1-page outline instead of 1-page outline first, and they're like, oh, this is interesting, what else do you have in mind? Hit them with the longer outline immediately. I think that's a very strong thing. So how are you guys making contact with publishers? I mean, you guys have been around the block, and even the guys who, with the anthology route or self-published, you have other projects going on, and you're working these cons, you have an online presence, and you're trying to kick your way into these doors. So somebody out here has a finished issue, and their 1-page outline and their 5-page outline. How are they getting it into Image and then Top Cow and into
Network.
into Hex
I mean,
Comics?
honestly, ask family and friends if they know anybody. One of the benefits of living out here is that, there's a lot of comic companies out here. And, I have friends that work at DC, I have friends that work at other companies, or people that know people who work at companies. And that's really, the more personal it is, the more the person either knows you or can relate it to someone they know, the more willing they're going to be to look at your work. If you're just coming in as kind of blind, it's going to be a lot more difficult. So,
I think even if you can email Matt Hawkins and say, hey Matt, we met at a con briefly, that holds a lot more weight than some random dude who found your email address on a message board and is hitting you up. It shows that you're serious. It shows that you're at cons, working, trying to network like you're talking about. I think that's very important.
I think going the indie route, like the best advice I heard in general for any kind of ask is to make people feel good about helping you. Like have the most clear vision that they can see and get behind and get excited about, and then be the kind of person that you would want to help. Be nice. Regular etiquette stuff your mom taught you works real well in here.
Yeah, well, and everybody's hitting on this. Just remember that when you're doing submissions, you're selling yourself as much as you're selling the book. People want to work with people they like. That's what Mike's saying. Nobody wants to work with an asshole or a difficult person. It's the beauty of meeting, these editors, these publishers at cons, is because you've passed the Cretan test. You met them in person. You proved not to be a weirdo. You shook somebody's hand. You looked them in the eye. They have a frame of reference. They're like, this is a person who can present themselves in a business-like manner. I think that's important. Also,
professional is key.
What's that?
Always being professional is key. The stories that we're developing now came from people that we met at shows, got to talking to. There was one that we didn't meet at a show, and we ended up parting ways because of an unprofessional attitude and feeling like what you said about being the person that you would want to help that's a really great way to put it. That's exactly what you should be, because otherwise, good luck making it yourself.
I think too that it's important that you need to figure out not just what your comics story is, but what is your story. You're selling your story again. Why should this company invest in you? And part of it is about being professional and not being a sociopath or anything like that. But I think again, there's so many people trying to do this these days. So why do you have a body of experience or an angle on this thing that is interesting? And again, how can somebody bet on you? Again, I've been a professional screenwriter for 12 years. I've delivered stories for 12 years, and I've worked for some big people. So an editor in the comics world can reasonably expect for me to deliver a story that's coherent, deliver it on time. David, you critique comics for years, so people have some reason to believe that you might know a little bit of something about it. Jeff was a journalist, again, delivered on deadlines over and over again, but it's even more than that too, where, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, we have 5, white guys in their 30s up here. There's way too much of that in comics. It's getting a lot better, but there are precious few women in comics right now. And so I think it's a wonderful time to be a woman going into comics. We need those voices. And so when an editor comes across somebody who can write like Karla, or somebody who can draw like Lisa, they do backflips. And I think that's a wonderful time to do that. So just think about where are you coming from? What is your story? What is your point of view? I think all of this is interesting. And when you query these guys, lead with that stuff. This is. I have something to say. This is why it's important. This is why it will resonate with readers. This is how I will target an area of readership that is underserved. All of these things become very important.
And one other thing, I guess being on the team, finish your book, is you'll find there is a subtle but noticeable difference between being sort of a pure civilian who has not written or hasn't finished a comic, let me rephrase that, to somebody who has. And going on to what everyone's been saying about being professional, I don't know if anybody's ever done online dating. I've done online dating. And it is like perfect practice for this business, by the way. You will get your heart stomped on a million different ways. And you learn how to just kind of play it cool, how to be chill. And so if you have finished a book and you are chill and you go to a convention, the number one nicest thing to say to network around is you just say, hey, I really like XYZ book. Hi, I'm David. I really enjoyed this. How's your con treating you? And, just sort of, talk, just be chill, treat them like normal people. Trust me, no one on this panel is like, no one out there, I mean, if they're famous, they're comic book famous, so whatever. But I think just kind of like playing it cool and just talking to them like normal people will get you, I mean, that's how I've made friends in the industry. I don't think me writing reviews particularly helped me make friends in the industry, but just, like, hey, I really dug this book, or what do you have coming down the pike? I'd love to know about it. People are so used to sort of getting, like, hit with, like, and trust me, I love fans who come up to me, like, coming at 11. That's great. I love that they love my book. But I also don't know if I would do a book with them. But if you're like, hey, I in my mind believe that I'm a professional. I'm not an aspiring creator anymore. I have created. I am looking for a home for it. That sort of, I think, can break the ice a little bit and not make people think that, like, this fan's gonna, like, throw me in their van or something.
This is all good advice. We're running a little low on time, so I want to. No, we're doing well. Don't worry about it. So I want to. We've talked a lot about, okay, well, I want to go the traditional publishing route, but before this thing wraps up, we have 2 people on the panel who have, for various reasons, gone the self-publishing route, and that may be a better route for you guys, initially. What I will say is that it becomes a lot easier to get in with the Images of the world if you have comic books out there already, and going to self-publishing is a very easy way to do it. And we have Stephen, who has kind of gone the more traditional route with comicsology and stuff like that, and then we have Lisa, who went through the trouble of creating her own company and doing something a little bit kind of bigger, badder, meaner, starting to publish other people's books. Of course, it's all part of it. But talk about that choice. Why did you make that choice as opposed to going the traditional publishing route?
For us, it was control. We, very early on, when we released our first issue, we realized that we had something. We didn't know before we released it, but once we put it out there, it was like, oh wow, people really like this. Yeah, we have something for approached by a publisher or a distributor who was, making some overtures because, we only have the one issue. But they were like, oh, well, once you get 5, come back. And we went around to their booth, and it was just like, they're selling all of these other books, and they don't know how to sell our book like we do, and we don't need their direction as far as where we're going to take the story. We all just felt like we've got this, we know what we're doing, and yeah, it's going to be a harder, kind of slog to get to the larger audience, but it was worth it to us to maintain the integrity of the stories we wanted to tell.
Yeah, part of it for me too was, part of it was control, part of it was just kind of like a challenge to myself if I could do it. And it just kind of steamrolled. Part of the challenge of doing it in public is you're sort of learning in public. But for me, the other thing too is it's a business card. It's having something completed that you can show someone. Getting someone to read a pitch is difficult. Getting someone to read a comic is a little bit easier. Plus having it on an easily accessible platform like Comixology or whatnot, it just shows the publisher, if that's the route you want to go, that you can do it. You can tell a story, and that's the biggest probably advantage that you have if you don't come from that background. If you're not coming from a writing background or something where you have samples, anything you could show someone that says I can get from point A to point B in a story and it's coherent, you're already ahead of most people.
And so kind of in that same vein, I want to sort of start talking to the anthology guys here, because, it ends up being, I think that, doing a 10-issue run or even a, 22-page book or starting your own company, these can be titanic undertakings and maybe it's a little bit too much. And you guys approach that in a very interesting way. You told a smaller story as part of a larger anthology. And I think if you just want to learn how to do this, if you want to keep your foot in the door in this business, anthologies can be a really interesting way to go.
Yeah, there's sort of a safety in numbers principle, I think, around anthologies, right, where you know that you are going to be part of a larger project and all of these responsibilities we've been talking about, whether it's editing or reviewing the colors or the production process or the marketing of it, it's a shared responsibility. So you're one of 10 or one of 20 people in a book where in theory, everybody's going to be sort of tugging in the same direction, but all the responsibilities are shared or offset by other people, and that makes a huge difference. If you're at the end of the spectrum where you may not have a brilliant idea and you're ready to sort of go all the way down the road and have someone make it with you and pitch it, the anthology is also cool because it can act as sort of a writing prompt to give you an idea, right? So if you have an anthology with a theme or an anthology under sort of a larger umbrella, that can also help get you started because it's like, hey, you need to come up with a story, but in this limited little playground that we're going to give you. And I think that is also a really good way to get started, right? Because you're not out to try to create a 60 or 16 issue arc. You just have to come up with a cool little idea that can fit in this idea or this theme. And I found that to be really a supportive environment too.
How do you get hooked up into anthologies? Like, how do people reach out to you specifically? Right. Do you submit to them?
So there, as Ryan was saying, there's so many more resources now than there were, 5 or 10 years ago. There are dedicated social media handles that are just looking and sharing information about anthologies that people are putting together. There are Tumblr blogs that are just run by people that are trying to aggregate all the possible anthologies you could submit to. There are subreddits and all that kind of stuff. So if you just spend some time online, you can find people that are building anthologies. You don't have to submit or offer ideas to all of them. You want to kind of wait for the one that might suit your style. As David said, you're ultimately trying to build that calling card, whether it's big or small. So you want to find the thing that's going to give you a story that still feels like you, but fits within whatever theme they're trying to sort of put together. So I think the first one I did, I think I found through Facebook. And then the second one I did, I think I found through some other social media platform. That was it, and then it was a, there was a pitch process, a sort of micro version of what we talked about for bigger publishers. We took it from there.
I think an anthology is like a great way to like stand out amongst other, like, I guess we're calling it achievable work. But I had like, it was a very low-key anthology with an apocalypse theme, and I knew that everyone would be like pitching like, oh, like bombed out road signs from the future or whatever. And I was like, well, what's the most colorful thing? And it was oh, the places you'll go, which is something I've read a million times and like really enjoyed, and I knew also that I wanted to make a parody that would make someone cry. And so it's like, I want the most like effective thing within these smaller boundaries, like that really worked for me, rather than like standing on your own, like in the cold.
All right, we have people starting to come in the back door here, so we should probably wrap it up. Rapid fire, guys, what's next? Karla.
I have a new pilot script that my agent's shopping now called Photographs that recently placed as a semi-finalist in the Blue Cat screenwriter.
Rock and roll, Lisa.
Well, you too, excellent.
More Monster Matador and some other projects.
I have a one shot that I'm finishing up with a friend, and then working on a series proposal.
I'm not legally allowed to say this, but I've been consulting on a cartoon pilot based on the lives of Ice-T's dogs. One of the dogs in real life has since died, and Ice-T is playing one of the dogs, but is not playing himself. So there's lots of problems to solve, but I just want to share it with you guys. It's great.
What do you think, Dave?
Fantastic.
I've got a couple pitches that we're shopping around, including a hostage thriller rom-com called Going to the Chapel, and I'm very excited about. We're reviewing the numbers on Spencer and Locke, and if they are at a certain benchmark, we might be seeing some more stories with those characters very soon.
Cool, excellent. And look for Aberrant in stores this winter. Thank you to my panelists. I meant to leave time to take questions, but there was a lot that we still didn't cover.
Sorry, guys.
If you have questions, I think maybe most of us will be congregated outside. Feel free to kind of corner us and fire away. I apologize for not getting to you, but thanks, guys.